Welcome to Fresh Outlook on Edward TV. I'm Frank Cipolla. A lot going on in the world this week, including a possible resolution to the situation in Syria, which may include that nation giving up and possibly destroying its stockpiles of chemical weapons. Even days later, the hotly contested race for mayor in New York City is not over. And did marathon swimmer Diana Nyad, who swam from Cuba to Florida, accomplish her feat fair and square? But first, a look at the latest developments in Syria.
Solution to the crisis over Syria's chemical weapons, the country's civil war rages on. Dramatic new video shows Syrian rebels battling government forces in the strategic town of Kafr near the Idlib province. Other video posted online showed Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's troops bomb rebel positions in various other locations. Activists say the regime is also fighting for the control of the ancient village of Ma'alula near the capital of Damascus. In the meantime, the Syrian opposition has raised concerns about a Russian plan for the Assad regime to hand over its chemical weapons.
What we see from the Russian initiative, it is very silent on the very first issue, the issue of accountability. Arriving and reaching political solutions does not absolve the regime, the Assad regime, from the fact that it killed 1,466 innocent civilians. Of those were 400 children. So we are very concerned about the fact that the issue of accountability is being ignored.
A plan to put Syrian chemical weapons under international control has helped avert a U.S. strike against the country. The U.S. had threatened military action after it found the Syrian regime was responsible for a deadly chemical weapons attack near Damascus in August.
Joining us now to talk about the ever-changing situation in Syria is Republican strategist Dee Dee Benkie. Also, Dalia Fahmy, who is a professor of political science at Long Island University, and Scott Monje from the Foreign Policy Association. Welcome, all of you. This is really a very fast-moving story. We find out today that an agreement has been reached between Russia and the United States, which Syria has yet to sign off on, that would allow this to sort of resolve the crisis. Are you hopeful that this is something that can work? We'll start with you.
Well, you've got various levels of crisis going on. I mean, you've still got a civil war that's not going to be touched by this. This involves just the use of chemical weapons, and hopefully we'll take that out of the larger equation. Will it work? The full thing doesn't actually have to work. If it works, it's fantastic. But just setting them aside, if they don't get them all destroyed, if they put a padlock on them and a remote camera, so we can see what's happening with them, we'll know more than we know now. Remember, a week ago, no one was even thinking of asking the Syrians to give up their chemical weapons. Right. We were going to bomb, but we weren't going to bomb their chemical weapons. You can't drop high explosives on sarin gas. You'll have a toxic cloud on the country that would make this whole issue moot. And now that they've promised to give up the weapons, if they should then turn around and use them again, Congress would be much more accommodative, I think, to requests to retaliate against them than they have been up to now.
Professor, what does it say that al-Assad so quickly sort of capitulated here and said, okay, we can work a deal, it's doable? What does that say to you?
Well, I don't think it's that simple. You know, we all are treating this as if it's a new gaffe that Senator Kerry made, which made this, oh my gosh, a possibility. But apparently, there's been some New York Times articles that said this has been in discussion for quite some time. So it's not a new thing. I think the thing that we are underestimating is the simplification of the destruction of chemical weapons. They have over 4,000 tons of chemical weapons on 45 sites with 6 manufacturing areas. You don't simply bomb chemical weapon sites. These require the dismantling of weapons. There has never been in history the dismantling of chemical weapon sites during wartime. In order for you to have access to all of these sites, you're going to have much cooperation from rebels, from the Free Syrian Army, from the Assad regime. So in history, there's never been the dismantling of chemical weapon sites during wartime. But more importantly than that, Bashar al-Assad has over 4,000, I think the estimates are, of weapons delivery systems, chemical weapons delivery systems. So this is a very long, drawn-out project. When the United States and the Soviet Union back then decided to reduce their chemical stockpiles, we are still doing it. We still have yet to dismantle all of Saddam's chemical weapons. So this is a very long and drawn-out process. For us to assume that this is a Band-Aid on the situation is extremely naive.
Well, let's go back a little bit. You make a very good point. And we'll talk about the politics with Dee Dee in just a moment, and all of you as well. But you've talked about how Kerry, Secretary of State Kerry, made this off the cuff. I don't think it was off the cuff. It's in my opinion that was a trial balloon to see what would happen. And the media has picked it up as an off the cuff comment, which I don't totally believe. Do you believe that that was an off the cuff comment?
Apparently, there's been some talks between Putin and Obama in St. Petersburg and with their counterparts earlier than that. And I think it was actually the Russian administration who had presented it initially. Right. There's Professor Cohen at NYU who's written a couple of articles on this and is saying for us to call it as all of a sudden would deny the fact that diplomacy has been going on behind the scenes for almost a month now.
Well, let's talk about President Obama.
If I could jump in on that right there. I have my own little theory that's completely unsubstantiated, so don't hold me to it. But I think, as you say, they've been talking about this behind the scenes, and both sides have said that. But they haven't said they came to an agreement. Some people came up with this notion that they agreed to do it this way and make it look like a gaffe, which is kind of bizarre. You know, if we can make this look really ham-handed if we want to. I think they couldn't come to an agreement for the reason that has already come up, that the Russians want us to stop arming the rebels and to promise never to bomb them in return for giving up the chemical weapons, and we wouldn't agree to that. So when this question came up, and with this notion in the back of his head, Kerry said, well, they could just give them all up, but it's not going to happen. And the Russians took that opportunity to jump in and make their proposal public, probably with the hope that they could get this condition in the process of working it out, and we accepted it in the hope of we could keep that out. And it looks like they're keeping it out. It almost
has sort of an overtones of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where deals are made in the back that we don't see and probably won't know for years from now. But everything is politics. Everything goes back to politics, Dee Dee. Had the president said something like this, he would have been perceived as weak. So he sends out Secretary of State Kerry to say it, and he sort of agrees to it, and it allows him to save face. That's my take on it. Number two, do you think Obama is doing the right thing in trying to find a resolution, because 63% of Americans say they don't want another war, and he reads the polls as well.
Well, yeah, I think this is like the ninth straw that they're trying to grab. I mean, first it's a red line, then we avoid that for, I don't know, a year, then we're going to strike, then we're going to ask Congress, and then we're going to go to Putin. Oh, and now we're doing this? I'm sorry, but there's no credibility at all. I don't believe a word they say. Well, you know, and what if there are weapons? They're probably moving them right now and laughing. You know, after Putin did the op-ed and said, you know what, Americans, it's dangerous for you to think you're exceptional. Forget him. I mean, there's no credibility at all. And actually, all this has done is strengthen Putin and made our president look weak. So it doesn't sound like a good idea. None of it is.
Let's talk about the red line, though. There was a red line when there was definitive proof, according to the White House, that this had happened. There was proof on the ground, video proof, and so on and so forth.
But for a while. For a long while. I mean, so, but then...
But not a year. You said a year. It wasn't a year.
No, yes, it was. I mean, they've known for a long time, Frank, and when it came to the red line...
Well, when you say that, no, when you say they have known for a long time, how do you know they have known for a long time?
Well, there were reports on it. Are you saying that he just found out the red line?
Substantiated reports?
Well, I guess we have to talk about substantiated, but bottom line, he said he was going to do something about it, and then even when there was total proof of the red line, he didn't, and he wavered, and then he didn't do anything, and then he went to Congress, and it's like, well, let's have them talk about it. Every time he wavers and dithers, it makes him look weak. And right now, that's where we are. It's a joke. I mean, he has no credibility now. Our country looks weak.
Professor, do you agree?
No. There's two different conversations here. We can talk about Obama and Putin as politicians, or we can talk about them as statesmen. Politicians care about looking weak domestically. Statesmen take on a risk to actually come to international agreements. When former President Reagan and Gorbachev came and sat, and they were perceived, remember, as weak. But what ultimately happened? The Cold War ended.
Yes.
So there's a big difference between politicians reading the polls and statesmen making decisions for the sake of the international community.
I wish they were statesmen. That's what they're doing. They're both playing politics. That's all they're doing.
Well, of course, they're representing their constituencies.
And nobody wants to go to war, so that's why it has to come up with this 18th straw.
We've also had, one war wound down in Iraq, one ongoing in Afghanistan. And with all due respect, Dee Dee, we talk about the Republicans all the time, and they're always chattering about we don't have any money left. We should got to get the deficit under control. But there's no problem spending money from the Pentagon budget or even money beyond that for this engagement, and that's never a problem.
But nobody wants this engagement because nobody thinks the president knows what he's doing, and there's no plan, there's no strategy. Why would we go in and start strike? Oh, there's a limited strike. We don't know what limited strike means. I mean, look what happened in World War I. One little event, and we had World War I.
Well, there were a lot of things leading up to that. I would agree that nobody wants the crisis to work into a war, and that's why they're opposed to going in and bombing Syria, because they're afraid that it's going to work into another Iraq war. They're afraid that it's not going to help the situation, it'll make things worse. They're afraid that we have things here that we should be concentrating on.
It will trigger a retaliatory strike in some way, shape, or form on the U.S. homeland.
Possibly, that, yes. And so it's very unpopular, and it's not a good idea to jump into a war with a political...
Without a plan.
Not without a plan, without support behind you. Congress wasn't very thrilled about it, although it's not clear that Congress was as opposed to it as presented. The public is very opposed to it, largely because of what's been going on for the last 12 years in the Middle East, and because of what needs to be done here. On Congress, everybody talks about how this was clear. They were clearly opposed to this because all of these tallies are lumping together no votes and leaning no. Leaning no isn't really the same as no. I mean, when you're in your home district and you're not on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and some reporter jumps up in your...
That's why they're doing it, because people at home, as you said, they don't want it, so they're listening to their constituency because they want to stay in office. They're representing their constituency.
This is true. But also when people run up to you at the microphone and say, do you support President Obama's plan to bomb Syria? You don't respond with, Syria, that's in the Middle East, right? You say, I'm skeptical.
Who said that?
I'm skeptical. I'm going to look into it more and listen to both sides on it. And then you call your staff and yell at them for not warning you about this. So the leaning no is an automatic first response. It could have gone another way. We don't know that it would have gone another way, but if it had come to a vote, it wouldn't necessarily have reflected the tallies.
We agree that the president is between a rock and a hard place. Absolutely. He could act unilaterally and bomb Syria, and then he'd probably get some flack. He could get Congress's approval or not, and then look weak. I mean, what do you do but try to find a resolution that'll sort of make it go away? It's a complicated situation. It might take years to dismantle these chemical weapons, but it is a resolution that keeps the peace for the time being, and not with the Civil War, but at least on this issue. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, the president is actually between a larger rock and a harder place, because he's stuck between losing the Assad regime and having a major power vacuum in Syria, where you get influences of Iran and of Hezbollah in Lebanon, or of a stronger Syria with with Russia, and stronger relations with a newly formed government in Iran and in Hezbollah.
Right, let me stop you there, because it is a complicated situation. We have to take a break, but we're going to continue the discussion in just a moment. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion about Syria, including this week's interview of embattled Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad. We'll be right back.